All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third breakout session of the day. I hope you guys are enjoying the event. I see we have a small crowd, so we can do the session a little bit more interactive. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. So it's always great to be here at Ignite, the biggest Microsoft conference for IT, especially because we get to talk about all the work that we're doing back at Microsoft and present it here. So it's definitely real exciting. The last time I had the opportunity to present was at Build back in March. So there's definitely like 6 months of work that we're willing to share today. And hopefully you will find the session valuable and lots of great information for you to take back. So my name is Rolando Jimenez. I'm a program manager in the Office Extensibility team. And I've been working with Office add-ins since they were released in 2013. And since then, there's been a lot of progress. There's a lot of evolution that has happened in the Office add-in framework. We're going to take a look at that. It's also incredible to see how accelerating is the pace of innovation at Microsoft and in general in the industry. But just thinking about 2013 versus today, we have now Office 365 running across 9 different platforms. We ship product updates every single month. And we have the capability to release like patches and fixes like almost every day or every week. So it's just amazing the amount of work that we can get out now in a more agile way. So today, I'm really excited to dive into how do you create enterprise solutions that integrate natively into Office. So we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about how do you do that with Office add-ins. We're going to start with a brief intro about Office add-ins. What are they, and where are they supported? We're going to do a quick summary of all the things that have happened since the last announcements we had at Build, which was another big moment where we had a lot of new features coming out. So there's definitely a lot of exciting things that we are announcing here at Ignite. We're going to then drill down a little bit into developing Office add-ins. We're going to take a look at how to develop an add-in either from scratch if you're starting with a new project, or how to reimagine an existing project or solution that you want to modernize and bring to the new world of cloud and devices of Office 365. So for those that are familiar with VSTO, we hope to make this session relevant for you guys as well. We're going to talk about how to connect to services, which is one of the most common patterns that we see in the enterprise. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to create great UX, because obviously productivity and great UX go hand in hand. So we want you to create experiences that really enhance that productivity. We're going to close with a little bit of roadmap, what's coming, and how you can get help from us. So let me start by placing this session in the context of the overall Office Development Platform vision. So many of you probably attended the Office Development Platform overview. Can I see hands? OK, so just a few. Let me actually then spend a little bit more time setting the context here. So the Office Development Platform has 3 main pillars in which we are basically enabling developers to extend Office 365 with custom capabilities. The first one is how do you integrate your solution, your custom functionality natively into the different Office clients. This is done through add-ins and web parts in SharePoint. The second big pillar we have is we're investing a lot in enabling web apps and device apps to connect via the Microsoft Graph, which is a set of REST APIs that are exposed by Office 365 Cloud, to create solutions that basically integrate services and content from the cloud into your custom device app or application. And lastly, the third area of investment for developer productivity is how do you create the next generation of innovation around productivity. And we have a set of extensibility capabilities around leveraging voice, video, connectors, and bots. So there's obviously sessions in the conference that drill down deeper into the other two. So today we're going to focus on the first one, which is how do you create solutions that integrate natively into Office. So drilling down a little bit more into that, I want to talk about the next or the newest generation of Office add-ins, which we call web add-ins. And I'm pretty sure you guys may be familiar already with extending Office through add-ins. We have a couple of technology choices, including COM and VSTO, and now the latest generation of Office web add-ins. So can we see a show hands of people that are familiar already with developing or managing a portfolio of COM add-ins or VSTO add-ins? OK, so pretty much everyone in the audience. What about familiarity with the new Office web add-ins platform? OK, a few as well. Perfect. And who is just ramping up and learning about these new Office web add-ins? So also a few. That's great. So just to give you a very quick overview about the goals of the new web add-in framework, there are three main benefits and goals that we expect to provide. The first one is we're betting on the web as a development platform. And what this means is that these new web Office add-ins are developed using standard web technologies like HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And not only that, you can also take advantage of anything that you use to develop on the web, from tool sets, from community-driven projects and libraries, from other frameworks that are provided and supported in the web. So there's a lot of richness that you get as a developer. And the best of all is you also get to leverage your existing web skills. So if you know how to build a web app, you pretty much are 80, 90% there in terms of knowing how to build a web add-in. Now, you can build the interface and the integrations using web technologies, but at the same time, we also provide native extension points in the Office clients so that your solution can integrate very nicely and in a very familiar way for the end user. So for example, you can extend the ribbon to provide new buttons. You can extend context menus. You can show native task panes and dialogues inside Office. And this just makes the web and Office blend really nicely together. And that's what we call natively integrating your solution into Office. And hopefully, with the demos, this will become much more clear. Now, the second big goal and benefit of this new framework of web add-ins is multi-platform. So we moved from a desktop suite in the 90s, which made Office really popular, to a set of servers and clients, to now a set of cloud and devices. And Office now runs on 9 different platforms. And we didn't have a single extensibility technology that allowed you to extend Office across all these new platforms. VSTO and COM are great and will continue to be great for the desktop. But in terms of extending beyond the desktop, we didn't really have anything. So one of the goals and the value propositions of the new web add-in platform is that you will be able to now create a single extension or add-in, and that will work across all the different platforms where Office runs. And lastly, we also expect to make the distribution a lot easier and modern. With VSTO and COM, as you're familiar, you need to basically deploy bits to each of the client machines and manage those bits there. With the new web add-in framework, you will see that there's really no bits that are deployed to the machine. It's basically a web model where you deploy your bits to the web server, and then the client machines basically access the latest version live from that web server every time the functionality gets activated. So hopefully, also from a management perspective, you will see a lot of benefits in terms of like lifecycle updates and fixes to these web add-ins. So let's take a look at what is a web add-in and why would we want to create one. So from a technical perspective, an add-in is really a simple concept. It's effectively just a web app that can be created with your standard web technologies, HTML, JavaScript, CSS on the client. But you can also add whatever server-side logic you want built on any web server stack. So you can take advantage of ASP.NET, Node.js, PHP, you name it. I mean, it's just the web. So think about it as just a web app that you're building. The main difference between a standard standalone web app and a web add-in is a manifest, that it's a simple XML file that describes how that web application is going to integrate into the Office UI natively. And we'll see a couple of examples in the demos after these. The other difference between a regular web app and an add-in is that an add-in also integrates our Office JavaScript API. All you need to do really is have a reference in your HTML to integrate our Office JavaScript library, and then you'll have access to the object models of the different clients and be able to interact with content and with the functionality of Office. And then the result of that is an Office add-in that can run across many different platforms. Now that's the technical side. I'd also like to touch on the business side. Why would you build an Office add-in in a world where you need to make investment choices of many different solutions in the enterprise? Why to invest on an Office add-in, specifically a web add-in? So for me, the answer is simple. We know Office is the best the best of productivity tool in the world, and users spend an average of 2 hours every day in the Office clients. And that's just because, in many cases, Office is the best tool for the particular job. Now, not everything happens in Office. There's a lot of tasks and processes that happen outside of Office. And that's where your business value and your competitive edge is, in those custom business processes that make your business and your enterprise unique. The challenge I see is that in many cases, Office is siloed with respect to those business processes, and we see a lot of inefficiencies because of that. One concrete example is context switching. Context switching is a productivity killer. Many times I've seen Excel users that are working on a sales proposal and financial analysis. They want to import some data from a CRM system, let's say some product or sales history information. They need to leave Excel, they need to open up a new app, log in with a new set of credentials, somehow copy or export the data, import or paste into Excel, spend a few minutes trying to format and get rid of the unnecessary columns that came across. And that's just a step that they do all the time. And that's where Office add-ins can really add great value, just avoiding that context switching, which kills the productivity. So by creating an Office add-in that integrates those services and those business processes from outside Office, bring them in context with the Office client, you can achieve a lot of efficiencies in many different processes. Now, with that context, I'd like to talk about where can you take advantage of Office add-ins in terms of products and platforms. We are still building the framework, but we have made a lot of progress in terms of products supported. Add-ins are currently supported in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and newly announced at Ignite in OneNote. And as you can see from this slide, we are focusing on what we call the desktop platforms, which is effectively Win32 Online and Mac first. And we're starting to also go into tablets and phone in the future. So expect support for add-ins in those other platforms as well. I'd like to show you, in case you want to keep up to date with this information, there is this page, Office add-in availability, that if I click it, let's see if I can show it here. Basically, that is the same matrix we have on the slide, but it's live and it's always up to date with the latest support that we have for Office add-ins. So you will find it at dev.office.com, which is a site that you'll see me repeat all the time because that's where we keep all the information. And add-in availability page is right there. Great. So let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about what's new. OK. Oh, interesting. It seems I have animation that it's advancing the slides. So let me just come here. I'll just put it like that for now. So let me talk about all the things that we're announcing here at Build that are new since the last 6 months or so. So we have a few features in preview. We have features that come from preview to GA, and we have new features in general availability. So in preview, we have now add-ins that support commands extending the ribbon, as well as composing email in Outlook for Mac. We used to have add-ins in the Mac already supported, but these two capabilities of composing and putting add-ins in the command area of the ribbon were not supported. We're not going to drill down too much about that in this particular session, but there's another session. The code is there. If you're interested specifically in Outlook add-ins for the Mac, you can go there. Also in preview is a new feature which we expect to be a great feature for enterprise IT, which is Office 365 centralized deployment. And this basically is a feature that allows you to, as an Office 365 admin, to push add-ins to your users based on Active Directory groups. So you can easily go to your Office 365 admin console, select a group, and say, I want to deploy this add-in to this group. It's as easy as just going to that admin portal on the web. And again, we're going to just briefly talk about that in this session. But if you are interested in knowing more details about that, there's another session tomorrow at the same time where you can learn more about that feature. We also have a few other features around discoverability and deployment. Deep linking support is about the ability to let users use add-ins from web links. So if you have a marketing campaign, or even internally in your enterprise, you want users to use a particular add-in, you can send an email with a link, and the link will automatically install the add-in on that user's account. We have continuously, you will see that we have Word and Excel, and in the future, other product APIs in preview. So as we'll see in the next couple of slides, dev.office.com and GitHub are the repositories where we keep all this information. So if you want to learn about the preview APIs, I will show you the place in GitHub where you will be able to do that. We also have a new capability, an API, to be able to display native dialogues, which is something that was frequently requested we didn't have before. And let's switch now to the things that are moving to general availability from preview. So one big announcement that we are doing here at Ignite is add-ins for OneNote Online. And I'd like to show you just a quick demo of that, because I think it's really exciting. Okay. So I'm here in my OneNote Online. And as you saw, other platforms are coming soon, and we're working hard to get them out there as soon as we can. But in here, we're starting with OneNote Online. And hopefully, this is super appealing for anyone that's working on the education. So anyone working on the education space, perfect couple of folks. So let me just show you how add-ins look in the OneNote Online product. So they are available through this Insert Office Add-in menu. I'm going to come here. And right now, we just have a couple of add-ins that have been published to the store, and we expect more to come. Let me just show you a quick example of this Graph My Equation. So this is an add-in that, as you can see, shows as an object inside the OneNote page canvas that basically, in this particular case, allows you to graph an equation. So if you're a student or you are a scientist that is doing a paper, or even in an enterprise scenario, you are designing something that requires a custom visualization, you can use an add-in like this to add interactive content to your OneNote notebooks. Let's see. And then I'm going to write an equation here, like something like this. And then just press enter. And then, boom, you have an interactive graph right there in OneNote that you can keep with the rest of your notes and participates of all the OneNote functionality. Similarly, you can have task panes. So in here, I already installed this add-in. And this is interesting because this is an add-in that was originally created by Pickett for Word and PowerPoint to insert images. Because we're using exactly the same framework and technology to support add-ins in OneNote, it was really easy for them to add support for OneNote and be able to insert images also in OneNote notebooks. So they enabled their add-in for OneNote, and now I can search for an image here. Let's search for a cute cat, and then insert it. And then, as you can see, the add-in is using the OneNote APIs to interact with OneNote content and be able to insert content right there in my OneNote notebook. Great. Let me move this back here. And perfect. Great, so that was OneNote add-ins. If you are interested in learning more about that, again, there's a specific session that's going to drill down into OneNote Online. It's on Friday, 9 a.m. There's the code. So now, for my next demo, I'd like to touch on a couple of questions that I often get. The first one is, what type of scenarios can be supported with this new web add-in platform? And the second one is, if I have a VSTO solution, can I implement it as a web add-in? So in order to address those two questions, I'd like to show you a real-world example that illustrates not only the use of the latest and greatest that we have in the Office web add-in platforms, but also shows how to reimagine a VSTO add-in that was already being successful in the market to take advantage of the benefits of the new web add-in platform. So for this demo, we're going to take a look at the solution that is actually currently being rolled out by the Microsoft Sales Desk team internally at Microsoft. And it's going to help the salespeople be much more productive and efficient at producing sales documents. So for that demo, I'd like to invite Ray Mering, that's here with us, to stage, to show us a little bit more about the document builder solution from Quaros and talk a little bit about that effort.
Thanks.
So Ray, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Rolando. It's good to be up here.
So yeah, I was just going to say, can you tell us a little bit more about Quaros, the document builder solution, and how Microsoft Sales is going to use it to be more efficient?
Absolutely. So Quaros helps companies to be more productive with their business-critical documents and finding content and then using that content in the Office environment. We typically use and work with sales and marketing type people. So folks who are looking to generate a proposal, to create a contract, to be able to respond to an RFP. And when you're working with people in those industries, it's critical that you don't give them very complicated tools to work with. They need simplistic tools, things that they can ramp up really quickly with and continue to do their day job. And so when we looked at how to design solutions for that particular audience, we realized that the best place to put those solutions was, in fact, inside of Microsoft Office, to put them into Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, into those environments so that the sales and marketing people who are creating proposals don't have to change context, as Rolando mentioned earlier. They can simply work inside their environment. We started off with developing these solutions as VSTO add-ins, and a lot of our current client deploy base is using the VSTO version of the software. And I thought we could just show you what that looks like.
Yeah.
So here you're looking at Word, And what we've done here is we, with a VSTO add-in, have deployed a button onto the ribbon over here, Chorus Breeze. That's the name of our product. And when you click on that button, it pops out a task pane down the right-hand side. Now, key things there is the button in the ribbon means that sales users can quickly get to that set of functionality, and they don't have to dig around for it. The next thing they have to do is to actually go and log in to our servers. And for that, we use Active Directory on the servers. They have to supply us with a username and password and also point at a particular URL. And there you can see kind of the settings that they need to supply to us, which would be proprietary to their actual implementation. When they get through that step, the next thing that they can do is to be able to do things like run searches. And we have an entire database of sales and marketing content that we manage on behalf of these customers. And they're able to go in and, using this kind of search button over here, have a look for key documents that they want and click on the search button and find some of those documents that are sitting in that database. And then from there, they can choose to do a few things. They could preview it. And what you can see happening in our VSTO version is that the task pane actually expands at that point. Or if we go back to that result over there, they can simply hit the insert button, and that will then load that content and deploy it into the Word document. And that's available across all of those platforms.
So that obviously is great functionality. I'd like to then talk a little bit about how you guys took this project and moved it to web add-ins. What are the benefits that you guys were looking for or are seeing with that move? And maybe we can see also a demo.
Absolutely. So one of the challenges that you'd be familiar with on VSTO is that it only deploys onto one platform. It basically works on the Windows platform. And we had a number of customers coming to us off multiple platforms, and they were looking to use this kind of technology. It's also quite challenging in that you've got to do a full deploy. It's like a client deploy coming down onto the client desktop. And so we embarked on the development of a web add-in. And our developers really enjoyed that experience because they were able to use modern technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and to use those skill sets that they had developed over the years to apply it into building these web add-ins.
I think that's a key point as well because your product suite also has some web application functionality, right? So you already had to have those skills, and the web add-in, I guess, allows you to reuse those assets and skills and just put them into the effort there.
Exactly. We could take the team that we had and we could very easily shift them into building web add-ins without having to take them through a whole retraining exercise. So if you come across to this particular view, here we're in Word Online, and we're using a web add-in on Word Online here. You can actually see that very same button over there that appears. The advantages to using these web add-ins means that we can deploy this across Mac, deploy this across Windows, deploy this in the browser. We really cover all of the platforms. We have access to putting this out into the Office store, so it's a marketplace that's out there. People can get to that and they can download that add-in. As we've discussed, it's familiar technology as well. The deployment is really easy. There's no client deploy here. It's a simple browser type experience that the user has to go through. And then, of course, Microsoft supplied the Fabric, the App Fabric framework, which means that the applications look really attractive as well. And usability is a key goal that we set with the development of this application, and using that App Fabric allows us to have very usable apps. So here you can see that button. When I click on this button, it loads up the Doc Builder interface right here in the browser. And what I could do there is I could actually go back and maybe just to do that, log out, so you can see what that process looks like. So the first thing that you'll see in a logged out view is that the panel loads up as a task pane, and we've got this welcome page that is visible there. And a welcome page is really important, whether you're an ISV or an SI or whether you're building this for your own internal department, because it kind of tells your end user what this is all about, what you're getting through this process.
I think this is a great point. I also like to highlight what Ray was talking about, the Fabric. We're going to I'm going to show you a little bit more of that, but the Office UI Fabric is basically a UI framework that you can use to create your UI and make it look and feel like the rest of Office, because it's the same framework that we use to create other Office products like SharePoint, OneDrive, etc. So you get access to the same icons, fonts, colors, themes, etc. And you can see how it really looks integrated into Office.
Absolutely. So the next key thing for us was also providing training material directly to the user. So they knew what this was about and they knew how to work with it. And if you look at this landing page, you'll notice that there's this watch the video part there. When I click on that, it loads up a dialogue. Now, it doesn't look like you're loading up a chorus dialogue here. It actually looks like you're loading up an integrated dialogue into Office there. And then inside of that dialogue, we've got a video that we're serving up. And if you watch that video, it talks you through how to use this add-in and how to get the most out of the add-in.
And in this case, they're making use of that display dialog capability that we talked that it's currently in preview. We expect to have general availability really soon. But you can see how easy it is for them to basically reuse these videos from YouTube, right?
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, because it's the web, it's just like very easy to embed a YouTube video on the web add-in through the new dialog interface.
Yeah, it's really great. The users love it. Next thing is we can simply log into this. So let's scroll it down here. You'll see login with Office 365. So instead of having to supply a whole Active Directory setup, we really integrate here with Office 365 and with the credential management there. And I've loaded some of our credentials in here. And you'll see that signing in is just as simple as signing into Office 365. So we completely integrated into that environment.
We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but also the authentication, the way you integrate with services in web add-ins is really straightforward. It's very easy to support standards like OAuth to create this authentication. This is actually what's happening here. They're doing an OAuth flow against Azure Active Directory and basically connecting to the different APIs exposed by the graph.
That's right. When you look at the panel, it looks slightly different to the VSTO version. Obviously, we've had an opportunity to reimagine that application, and so we've made some enhancements to the end user usage there. But the result is very similar. So if I go in here and I type in that same search term, healthcare, and run the search, what this is doing now is it's actually hitting SharePoint Online, and it's finding any document that has healthcare either in the title or in the body of that document, and it's bringing back a whole series of results that I can then filter. And if I click in here, I can see what that result looks like, where I found those keywords. And I can do things like preview that document as well, again using this dialog to be able to look into that document. This time it's a responsive design, so we can actually expand that out and make that whole view bigger and look at it. And it's not just loading up in the task panel at that point in time.
That's great. Again, another example of using the new display dialog API to show an interface that looks much better integrated into the Office clients. And I mean, this is the first time that we're seeing an add-in like this working in Word Online, thanks also to the fact that they are using the new APIs that we just released in Word Online, the version 1.1 and 1.2. Are enabling these type of scenarios where you can like read content, insert content into the document.
Yeah. If I hit the insert button, it's going to take that document, it's going to insert it in at the point at which my cursor was there, basically loading it from SharePoint Online, pulling it across now, and putting that insert into the actual source document there. And there you can see that it's implemented that there. Now, we've taken this a little bit further in adding additional capabilities into this. One of the things that we implemented was this concept of refresh. And this is really cool because often when you're writing a document, you'll refer to previous content, and then you will find that after you've inserted that content in or copied and pasted it in, the actual source changes. Somebody updates it, some subject matter expert changes something. And you want to be able to go back in and to refresh those sections. So we wrap all of this into content controls so that we can trace where it came from. And then we use this refresh functionality to look back at that source document, check if there's been a version update to that, and simply allow you to update that into the doc.
And from a scenario perspective, I see that you can also not only refresh from the original source, but if you made modifications here, then you can publish back, right, and update the data source as well.
Our clients really wanted that because they wanted to do what's called in-flight changes. So you're a subject matter expert, you own the source document, and then you make changes when you're writing a document, an RFP, and it's better content than what you have on the server. Instead of having to edit the source, edit it in the destination, push it back to the source. And we can do that by reading that document now, again, using those web add-in capabilities.
And behind the scenes, this is all using, again, Microsoft Graph to talk back, to read information about the user, SharePoint, and all integrated into the context of the Office web add-in. So the point here is that when you create an Office web add-in, you can also take advantage of the other pillars that we talked about at the beginning of connecting to the graph or integrating even bots or video functionality into your add-in. So it's all like a mix and match set of technologies that you can use to create these solutions.
Yeah, it's really very powerful. So Rolando showed me a really cool trick in Office this morning. If I type in this statement here, it actually generates a whole bunch of text for me. But let's say that you're writing an RFP document, or you're writing a contract, a proposal, and you want to get that content to be reusable content. You don't just want to search and use content. You actually want to write that back to SharePoint Online. And so what we've got is this functionality called a clip here. And it lets me take sections of the document that I think are really cool and actually clip that back to SharePoint Online. So it looks at what I've highlighted there, allows me to give this a file name, decide whether this is a document, a full document, whether it's a snippet or a fragment of text, or if it's an answer to a question, and then to write that back to SharePoint Online into a particular library or a particular folder so that it's stored and it's reusable. And when I'm searching at a later stage, I can quickly find that. And so that's exactly what that functionality does. It reads the highlighted section there, and on the back end, it's actually creating another Word document and inserting that into it so that I can reuse that at a later stage. The next thing that we would want to do just to finish off this document is to use the Finalize button. Really simple piece of functionality, this, but it just pretty much cleans up your document, takes out any content controls that you might have, any markup that you might have in that document that you don't want there, cleans it up and gets it ready for you to send out.
So this is, in my opinion, a great scenario. I mean, you saw how in just a couple of clicks, he was able to, without leaving Word, create a full document with content reused. He was also able to contribute back to the original source using Graph APIs and SharePoint as a repository, and all within the web add-in interface inside Word Online. Now, another aspect we talked about is that this is not only supported in Word Online. Obviously, this add-in runs in Win32 in the same way, and you can play with it. There's a trial you can get from the store if you want to look at it. We also want to show that this also runs on the Mac. So if we can switch there, I think it's
number 7. Yeah. So what you're seeing there is the same task pane appearing now in Office for Mac. The great thing about this is that we didn't have to change the code. It's really the same code base that we had running on the Windows version, running online, and now running here in an Office for Mac. And the functionality is identical. So we're able to run this, and we're able to say healthcare again, hit the search button, find those results there, again, do a preview. We have this capability here as well to actually look at usage information about this particular document, so we can get some views on how the document was used. Seems to be running a bit slow here at the moment. But the functionality, the key point is that the functionality that we have there is really mimicked across all of those platforms in all of those areas there.
Yeah, not sure what happened here. Didn't load.
Didn't load.
Again.
But if I wanted to, I could do that kind of insert again, or load that preview up and actually view that preview there. So across all those platforms, same code base. And if you just compare that with VSTO and the challenges that we had with VSTO, while VSTO is a great technology, there are just significant advantages now to using these new web add-ins.
Ray, this is great. I think this is a great example of a real-world solution and really showcases how the new web add-in platform allows you to basically implement very valuable business scenarios that were not possible before in platforms like Mac and online.
Yeah.
So, hey, thank you very much
Thanks
for
for having
coming.
me up here. Thanks, everyone.
Great. So let me switch back to slides, and let's just do a quick recap of what we just saw. So we saw pretty successful, in my opinion, implementation of a web add-in that has BSTO ancestor. We saw the multi-platform support in the Mac, Win32, and online with a single code base. We saw the full power of web technologies providing rich and flexible UI, the YouTube video, the Office UI Fabric, all making the add-in feel very integrated into Office. We didn't mention this, but I'm pretty sure they're using also many of the community frameworks that are available in JavaScript there, like jQuery and Angular and Bootstrap and all those things, because they are just web technologies. You can use them in your add-ins. We also saw the Office 365 integration. So through the graph, they are being able to talk back to SharePoint, to the Azure Active Directory to get user information. And this just makes the solution much more integrated and appealing. And then lastly, we didn't show this, but we talked about this add-in can be deployed through a centralized deployment or through the store, as is the case of the Quartus Builder right now. We also saw adding commands, which is the ability to integrate natively into the ribbon. We saw the use of Office UI Fabric. And Office UI Fabric is also something that I'd like to just quickly show you because I think it's a really great tool for the creation of the UI in the new Office web add-ins. So if you go to dev.office.com, and go to Explore and Office UI Fabric. There you will see this is the new portal that was released for Ignite. And you will see that there's a new release of the Office UI Fabric framework. And if you go to this Get Started, they talk a little bit about what's included in Fabric. I just want to highlight that now Fabric is available in 3 different flavors. So there's Fabric Core, which is basically the fundamental elements like icons, fonts, layouts, animations, everything that makes the Office look and feel. And on top of Fabric Core, you have all these frameworks or components that allow you to have higher level functionality for Fabric. So there's Fabric React, which is a set of components built on top of the React framework. This is being used quite a lot by the SharePoint team because SharePoint is also using React as their native framework. For add-ins, you will be able to use Fabric React. We still don't have a lot of content and samples, but we're working on that, so expect that to come out in the near future. You can also use Fabric JavaScript, which is basically a framework-agnostic version of components for Fabric. And those are the samples that are available today. So I would recommend to go and take a look at Fabric.js. And if you're using other frameworks, like for example, in this case, Angular, you can also use the Angular.js version, which is a community-driven project that basically brings Fabric to Angular to create also components that have behavior and functionality using the Fabric UI. So coming back to the recap of the Quartus demo, we also saw this working in Word Online. So new to Ignite, we're also releasing the 1.1 and 1.2 APIs. We saw the display dialog API and how it can be used for different purposes, like they use it for the video, for the preview of the document, or for the login flows, which is one of the primary uses we see for that dialog. And lastly, we saw how they are leveraging the Microsoft Graph and SharePoint Online to bring that functionality into the add-in as well. That's great. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the types of implementations and real-world capabilities that you can build with add-ins. Now, let's talk a little bit about how do you go about creating a web add-in. So for that, I'm going to switch back to my demo machine, and I'm going to open Visual Studio here. So for this demo, I want to start again with some context. In this case, I have a VSTO add-in. This is a sample that we found that we used to have earlier. And it's a good sample because it showcases the typical pattern that you implement when you have a VSTO solution. So let me just go and run this VSTO add-in. It's an add-in for Excel that allows me to import data. So very simple, but also very useful pattern that allows me to save a lot of context switching. So as you can see, again, there's a button, there is a task pane, there is a place to capture a product name, and this is going to get me the sales history for that particular product, so I can select a date and then click a button here, get sales, and this is going to bring the data and create some graphs for me. And then from there, I can basically customize the table that I got. I want to hide the units, but keep the date. And then I can also come here. Oh, and because my screen is small, I cannot reach this. But I can change the colors of the table as well. And there are actually more options down there, which is showing that in this particular VST implementation, we didn't do a good job of making the UI responsive. So if I change these, or if I wanted to scroll, I had to implement that specifically in my VSTO logic. So just want to use this as a point of reference. We built this same sample, and you will find this comparison as well in GitHub in our samples repository as a web add-in. And I want to show you how it looks like. So I'm going to start with Visual Studio. And for those that haven't created a web add-in before, let me just quickly show you what is the experience in Visual Studio. If you go to File, New Project, you will find this section here for Office and SharePoint, and you will see web add-ins there. And we have, as expected, project templates for each of the different project types that you can create. In this case, I can create one for Excel, and I can just click OK. And as expected, this is going to create all the different artifacts that I need for my web add-in in Excel. Visual Studio does a good job. It's going to already implement the references to the key components like Fabric. It's going to automatically add a ribbon button for my add-in, so I'm ready to go and be able to launch a task pane. And it's going to give me a starting point in terms of an HTML page and a JavaScript. So as soon as this is done, I should be able to see what my project looks like. The key files that you need to look at is really just three things. Here's the manifest that we talked about. As you see, this is an XML file that contains information about how the add-in integrates into Office. So that's an ID, some button labels. It has some information about where the add-in will be hosted. Since I'm developing, there's a placeholder here that will be replaced to the actual location where this is published. And then there's information about the getting started experience, the ribbon integration. For example, here I'm extending the ribbon. And this all declaratively, I'm expressing how the web page that I'm going to create is going to integrate in Office. So as you can see, as part of this, I have control, which is a button in the ribbon that is going to have an icon, and it's going to have an associated action of showing a task pane. So all these declaratively stated here in the manifest allows me to have that native integration into Office. Now, the other piece of this is there is an home.html, which your main UI resides at. And then there's also Home.js, which is where all your logic is going to be. Visual Studio provides me a functional sample implementation. So without doing any code, I can just run this, and it's going to run Excel, in this case, Win32, and launch the add-in for me. So as you will see, this add-in is now available here in my ribbon. And I can launch it. And here, let's see, I can select this, click highlight, and it's going to highlight the max number. So something very simple, but it's just a sample template to get me started. Now, that shows you the experience of how you get started with an add-in. Now, I'm going to open a project that it's already done, which is the same VSTO add-in that we saw that imports sales information into Excel. Let's take a look at that example as a web add-in. And again, I have this sales tracker solution here, which is, has a manifest that describes the add-in. It has, again, a home HTML, home JavaScript, and it has some additional JavaScript where I have some charting logic where I control the settings for the charts. So nothing really fancy. I want to show you some of the key pieces here. We are integrating the apps for Office endpoint, which is the Office JavaScript. In this case, I am using an internal version of the JavaScript, but I could have been using the production version. Not sure why this is commented out. Then the rest is just HTML that makes up my interface. And then there's the JavaScript behind. So let me run this project so that we can take a look at how the same functionality looks like as a web add-in. So if I come to home here, now you see I have another icon. We're basically using the same icon the VSTO add-in was using to place similar button in the ribbon, but now it's going to launch the web add-in. Again, here we're using Fabric to make the add-in look more modern. By default, Fabric is a responsive UI framework. So if you change the size of this, it will automatically do it for you. You don't need to explicitly program for it. And here I can also type the name of a product, select a date for the history of that product, and you can see the same functionality is working also here in the web add-in. If in this case, we took the opportunity to also change a little bit the UI, make it better. So we have these pivots that are using Fabric icons where I can come here and change the table or the chart. I can say I want an area chart and I want a different type of background. In this case, I will just leave it like that. So you can see how it's really easy to kind of implement the same type of functionality that you had in a VSTO add-in in a web add-in. Now, this is not a very fancy or complicated example. So I'd like to extend it to do something more interesting. So in this case, I'm getting history information for a particular product. What I'd like to do is be able to drill down into each of those dates that I have there and see what customers actually purchase products on those particular date. So for this scenario, and this is also common in the enterprises, it happens to be that that information about which customers made the purchases on those particular dates is stored in an Excel spreadsheet that someone maintains in a SharePoint library. So what I'd like to do is extend this add-in to be able to reach out to that SharePoint place, read the information from inside the Excel spreadsheet, and bring it into context so that I can actually click on each of the rows in my Excel spreadsheet and see the customers. So again, this is avoiding the user to do a context switch, having to open a different workbook, and having to figure things out. We can just automate all that through the add-in. So let's see how we go about doing that. So I'm going to modify this code, going to the main HTML page here. And I'm going to start adding some references that I'll need. So as you can see, I'm reusing this library, which is a standard community library, very popular in the JavaScript world, that allows me to use the latest and greatest APIs from JavaScript. Some browsers don't support all of them, so this library basically makes sure that whatever I code against that API is going to work across browsers. So a lot of people use it. And then the second thing that I'm including here is this Office.js helpers. .js. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is going to be a really helpful tool for you guys if you want to implement service connectivity. So what we're going to do is connect to a service. And obviously, in order to connect to a service, which is the Microsoft Graph in this case, we first need to authenticate. So we're going to have to implement an OAuth flow from this add-in to connect to Azure AD. So normally, auth has been a challenging space. So we tried to make it as simple as possible this time around. So this library, Office.js helper, is basically a sample implementation of an OAuth flow that you can actually just copy, clone from GitHub, and include in your project. Is ready to go. Let me actually show you where it is. So if you come here and you come to samples, it will be published here. I'm not sure that it is ready yet. Let's see. No, they said it's going to be. But you can find it if you come directly to GitHub. And if you go to github.com/officedev, that is the main repository where we keep all these samples. So you can easily come here and clone it. And if I search here for Office.js helpers, you can see that you will find that repository there. And basically, that is the library. You just clone it, and there is a distribution folder. You just copy the JavaScript file from there, and then you're ready to go. So that is what I did. Basically, I added that as a script here, Office.js helper in my project. And now I'm adding a reference to that library. So I'm going to reuse that for my flow. Now, the second thing that I want to do is I want to add a new button to my task pane. And that is very simple. I'm going to leverage Fabric, and I'm going to leverage HTML and JavaScript to do that. So as you can see, the UI of that add-in is basically here. Here's a nav element that basically is that navigation on the top. And it has a few span elements, which is each of the tabs. So there's one for the date, the table, and the chart. So I'm going to come here and add a new one for my customers. So as you can see, I just added this much of HTML, which is referencing the Fabric classes. And it's going to use this MS icon person, which is coming from the Fabric. So I don't even need to include an icon. I'm going to reuse something that's already provided for me. And then when I click that button, I want to launch a pane. So I need the HTML for that pane. I'm going to insert it right here with the rest of the other panes. And this is what I just inserted, basically. It is a div in HTML that has an icon that I'm going to use to sign in to Azure AD so that I can connect to OneDrive and read my Excel file. And then I'm going to add a table where I want to put an HTML table where I want to put the customer information so that as I click on the rows, I will see those customers populated on that table. And that's basically all I have to do for my interface. So I added a button, and I added a pane that that button will show. Now, on the JavaScript, there's also just a few things that I want to add in order to enable that OAuth flow with that button. So one of the things I want to highlight here is there's this Office initialize function, which is very important when you're creating an add-in. That's the first function that gets called when your user first activates your add-in. So in that function, the first thing I want to do is have some initialization code. So as you can see from that Office.js helpers, there's an authenticator object, which is going to be the one that handles the authentication flow for me. So with just one line of code, I'm going to reuse this HTML page to also be the dialog, the page that shows inside the dialog when I do the authentication flow. In this case, what I'm doing is that if this page is invoked in the dialog mode, I'm just going to return. I'm not going to render the rest of the UI. But if it's rendered as a task pane, then I let the rest of the code run, which, as you can see, there's a bunch of variables with labels and colors. We're using jQuery here to also prepare the document and the HTML. You can see, just for those that are familiar with web development, this is just standard hooking up click events to different functions in JavaScript. So I'm going to come to the last line of that initialization code and add 3 lines of code. The first one is going to hook a click event to that button that we added in the HTML so that we show a pane. The second one is going to hook the click of the sign-in, which is going to invoke a sign-in function that I'm about to create. And the third button, the third line, is basically adding an event handler for when the selection changes in Excel. So as I select different cells, I'm going to be able to handle those selection change events. So I'm only missing 2 more things. I'm going to add that sign-in function so that I can initiate the OAuth flow. And for that, you will see here is the function definition. I have a variable to put the customer information that I'm going to read from Excel. Then I'm instantiating the authenticator object from the Office.js helpers. Again, this is something that you can reuse from GitHub. And as you can see, I'm providing some parameters that are necessary for OAuth to authorize my app to be able to talk to the graph. There is a redirect URL, which in this case, I'm doing a redirect to my local host, which is where I'm debugging right now. And I'm passing the scopes of permissions that I want to use for this add-in. In this case, the most important one is this files read, because I'm going to read a file from OneDrive, which is an Excel file that contains the customer information that I want to map to my sales history information. Now, once I'm authenticated, which the Office.js helpers will do for me, I only need to call this authenticate function to trigger the flow. And then on success of that, I'm going to issue an API call to the graph. An API call to the graph is as simple as invoking this URL. So you can see I'm doing graph.microsoft.com/me for that user. And then from there, I'm going to navigate to the drive. This is basically OneDrive for Business for that user. To the root of that drive, I'm going to search for this file on that root. And look at this. Thanks to the power of the graph, I can keep going deeper into the contents of that file. So by doing just a /workbook/worksheets, and then say I want the sales worksheet, and inside that sales worksheet, read all the range from A1 to C133, I will be able to grab the contents of that location and bring it to my web add-in. So really powerful pattern. And obviously here it's hard-coded, but I mean you could calculate these dynamically, and depending on how much data there's in the spreadsheet, you will have a different API call, right? The point is that it's very easy to call the graph. Now, when that call is successful, then I'm going to load the data from the response from the graph, which is going to hold all the customer information in this formulas collection as my customer's variable. And then the last thing I need to do is implement my selection handler, which we hooked up previously, to basically every time the selection changes, I'm going to look for the date that is selected. And if I have customers loaded, basically I'm going to render those customers in the task pane for that particular date so that I can see the details of which customers bought actually products in that date. And this for loop is just basically iterating through the customer collection and filtering out customers by date. So nothing really fancy. So with just that, I just extended my add-in to do an authentication flow against the graph, reach out into an Excel spreadsheet, read inside that Excel spreadsheet, read the customers, and handle selection change events. So let's see how that works. So let me press play. All right. So here, again, I have my track sales web add-in. Oh, Office.js helpers. Let's see what happened. Seems the reference may not be correct. Yeah, it's there. Let me try again. Sometimes there's... Oh, wait a second. I know what's going on. I put the script reference in the wrong place. I'm just going to copy these and put it before. In JavaScript, the libraries are loaded in sequence, so the order at which you put the reference matters. So I'm going to just move that up a little bit so that that reference will be defined. Okay, great. So now let's go to home, launch the add-in again. Now it works. Let's again search for no keyboard, and I have some data for September, so that let's get that data. And now you can see here's my new customers button. For some reason, I have some rendering issue there. But I'm going to click that, and it's going to show me a pane. So here's the HTML that we added, the sign-in button, and here's the empty table. Let's click on the sign-in button and see what happens. So it's going to trigger, this is all managed by the Office.js helpers. It's going to trigger the dialog, which is currently in preview, and show me the login screen from Azure, thanks to that URL that we passed on the permissions. So I'm going to use my currently logged in user to log into that. And as you saw, it already had my credentials cached. So hopefully this will come back here and should update this UI. For some reason, OK, there we go. So now the sign-in button is hidden because I'm signed in. And now if I click on the dates, I can basically see data coming from that Excel spreadsheet right into my task pane. So now I can drill down here in Excel. And then you can imagine then if I wanted to bring that data into another Excel spreadsheet, I could do that. And there's a lot of possibilities from here. But the point here is you can, thanks to these libraries and samples and taking advantage of the Office UI Fabric, very easily extend the functionality of your web add-in. And because this is all server-based, you just need to update your web server where this is hosted, and automatically all your users get the latest and enhanced version. Great. Let's go back to slides. So just a quick recap of everything we saw in the demo. So again, dev.office.com is going to be the single destination for developer resources. And also very important, github.com/officedev. That's where you will find all the repos with the samples, documentation. Even our open specs are there if you want to look at what's coming in terms of APIs. We saw the demo of VSTO to web add-in. Some considerations, if you are moving from a VSTO project to a web add-in project, we saw the multi-platform is one of the big benefits. In terms of runtime, you were used to .NET as the runtime. Everything runs in proc. In the case of web add-ins, the runtime is a web sandbox where the browser control is basically running your code. And it actually runs out of proc, and it gives you a little bit more isolation and stability for the Office application itself. The life cycle is also something that you will need to consider. In the case of VSTO add-ins, they run at boot, so your code is always running. Whereas in the case of web add-ins, they are launched on demand. So the user actually needs to launch the add-in so that any code from the add-in is running. but both add-ins can interact with the document. Programming languages, VSTO obviously is .NET in the case of web add-ins. For the client side is JavaScript, but we saw how you can also do any type of server-side logic. You can integrate ASP.NET on the back end, Node.js, PHP, anything you like. In terms of UI, you will have to move from WinForms to HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. But you will also find like very useful tools like the Office UI Fabric to let you create a really Office-looking UI. And lastly, we talked about deployment. Click once in the case of VSTO is the typical deployment mechanism, whereas for web add-ins, you now have the Office Store, which is a public global catalog that any user of Office can get to. But you also get the centralized deployment option for enterprise. So if you want to have a private deployment of internally developed app, you will be able to do that through Office 365 deployment. So we already did this demo. Just a quick recap of that. Take a look at the new Display Dialog API. It's really useful for implementing OAuth flows, and you can use it in conjunction with the Office.js helpers to implement an flow against different providers. The one I showed is against Azure, but we also have reference implementations for Google, Facebook, so you can get an idea of the different variants of providers. So if you have a custom one, you can take a look at the sample and very easily tweak it to make it work for your particular case. The library supports standard OAuth flows, including implicit and authorization code flows. So like you should be able to almost take that code and reuse it almost completely if you wanted to connect to a service. Oops. Now, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to wrap up with a couple more things. And again, this is advancing the slide for me where I don't want to. So let me just bring this up here. And so building great add-ins. We talked about the importance of creating a delightful UX. Office UI Fabric is one thing that I would really recommend to get familiar to. Also, learn about how to use the new Display Dialog for OAuth flows. Adding commands is a must-have now so that your users can find your add-in. Make sure you place an entry point in the ribbon so that it's one click away. And that's basically a productivity booster. You don't want your add-in to be too buried deep into the Office interface. Performance is another big consideration. Think about how to make your performance better. And obviously, you can use all the web techniques in terms of caching, setting expirations date, bringing data in chunks if you are reading a lot of data from the server, that kind of thing. So in this deck, I have a few links to valuable resources. We have a best practices page as well as UX design patterns page that will go super deep into all the different things that we recommend in terms of UI and UX design for web add-ins. And then lastly, I want to just mention that there is a talk tomorrow at 12:30 that will talk about how do you go about deploying web add-ins. They're going to go deep into the centralized deployment feature and show you all the different options that you will have to deploy these web add-ins once you are done with the project. So if you're interested, go to that talk, really recommend it. Let's just close out with what's coming. So in terms of the next immediate term, what are we focusing on? We are working hard to get that centralized deployment feature from preview to GA. We think it's really strategic, specifically for enterprise to get that out. We are working on the Mac implementation of adding commands. So this is one of the few features that we're missing on the Mac, the ability to place those ribbon buttons. In the Mac, there's a single entry point, and you need to launch add-ins from our insertion dialog. So you can still have the same add-in working across like Ray showed for the case of the Doc Builder add-in. It's only that the entry point is not going to be as prominent and visible in the Mac until we release these. But again, we're expecting to get these soon out there. We're obviously going to continually add more and more APIs so that you get the breadth and depth of the APIs as you are used to in the VSTO world. We will continue to expand the presence of add-ins across platforms and products. OneNote is obviously working on their Win32 and other platform implementations. We're also working on making even easier to do sign-in with Azure and Office 365 credentials. And we will continue to do UX and perf improvements. So these are the things that you should expect to see in the next few months. So with that, I just want to close, and we're almost out of time, but we maybe can take a few questions, or I'll be here, and you can just come here. But these are some pointers. If you haven't done so, join the developer program. It gives you a lot of communication about what's going on. You will get into a distribution list, and you will get communication, as well as some freebies in terms of having an Office 365 tenant you can use for development, and some other things. There's our Twitter account. There's hackathons coming up all the time. And if you have a user voice for feedback, that's something that we're continually looking in terms of, like, what APIs do you need? What extension points do you need? What is blocking your project? Let us know in user voice so that we can prioritize accordingly. And let me see. This is just a quick slide that shows the related sessions. It's a quick summary. And with that, I'm just going to wrap up. So please go and rate this session. Give us your feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope this was a valuable session.